Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and we are back with another discussion video this time. And as you can see from the title, we have an anniversary of a movie to talk about, and it's quite an influential movie, especially the landscape of movies that we've seen in the following 20 years. We're going to be talking about the X-Men franchise. So the first X-Men film turned 20. I believe it was on July 12th or 13th, some kind of time like that. And we were thinking of a video idea, and we thought, we've got a lot of films to talk about, not just the first one. We will be focusing in on that main trilogy, but we are going to be covering the entire X-Men franchise, from all the spin-offs, from all the highs and the very low lows of the X-Men franchise and everything in between. We're going to be covering it all. So how are we all doing today?
I am very well. It's kind of come out of a surprise. I mean, we didn't know we were doing this until, this morning in theory, like at 12:30. I'm kind of excited. X-Men's this low key. It was gargantuan, and now it's kind of I don't even know if there's
ready for a change.
It was the big comic book franchise until Marvel came along, until DC came along, and I'd say it was like the original series. Maybe.
Massive. X-Men's weird because I mean, Blade didn't. People say that X-Men came first, and Blade actually did, which is the biggest forgotten comic book movie fact of all of it.
Sort of like the modern aesthetic, look of superhero films.
X-Men was this incredible. Certainly, the original trilogy. God, that sounds weird. I guess that's more the trilogy. I guess you'd say it was this kind of we're in between comic book films being like one-offs about people to here's the MCU to now we've got to do our own cinematic universe to death. So X-Men's a very interesting one, and we're kind of going to, like I said, it's the 20th anniversary of the first film, so we're going to talk about that for a bit, but we are going to talk about the entirety of the X-Men franchise. So that is from X-Men 1 through to First Class, through to Deadpool, to even New Mutants, brackets, maybe.
We're still waiting. We're still waiting on it.
Yeah. August 28th apparently was in today's trailer. I don't think that's happening at all. If it does, it's just drop on Disney Plus. It's the most obvious Disney Plus film. Anyway, we'll save this for the end. But we're going to talk about sort of our first memories with sort of X-Men, I guess, as a whole. So I'm going to jump in first. So I'm not the only one. I didn't see the first X-Men film at cinema. I'm also going to put on record that I believe this was the final X-Men film I saw. Probably to about probably up to sort of 2010, 11, I'd say. So this is one that I've probably seen the least I don't know, definitely not the least, but of the originals and some of the newer ones, this is the one I've seen the least of the ones I enjoy. I think that's a better way to put it there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, my first X-Men memory is watching X-Men 3, The Last Stand at the cinema, because I hadn't seen 1 or 2. I was a big Spider-Man fan. It was one of my friend's birthdays. We were going to the cinema to watch X-Men, and didn't know anything about it. I knew, the guy with 3 claws. And I remember watching X-Men 3, and I really enjoyed it. And then one day I discovered that the entire universe despised it, and I was a bit taken back by that. But I'll get into that later on as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I beat you by 1 X-Men movie. So my first X-Men movie. And by the way, as we go through this thing as well, as we get more people watching, do comment and let us know some of your X-Men moments as well, X-Men memories. When did you see the films? Which is your favorites? Anything related to the franchise, do get your comments in as we go along in this live stream. So X-Men, X2, X-Men United, whatever it was called, it had a bunch of different titles. That was the first X-Men film I went to see at the cinema. That was back in the May of 2003. So I was 10 years old at the time. I was a big X-Men fan before that. Not so much from the first movie. I do remember seeing it, but I didn't have that massive love or verve for it that I did with X2 and, I didn't for X3. We'll get into that. But the animated show that came out in the 90s was one of my go-to TV shows that I watched as a kid. You had the animated Spider-Man one as well. And it was kind of and Batman the Animated Series. And it was kind of those 3 superhero shows that kind of formed my love for those respective franchises, Batman, Spider-Man, and X-Men. So, but I remember X2 being the big deal. And obviously it's regarded as easily one of the best. But in terms of the first X-Men film, it's one that I vaguely remember watching, but I never went back to it all that much. It was always X2, or as we've gone further, some of the later editions in the franchise as well.
For me, my first experience with an X-Men film was X2. I was around a friend's house and it just randomly was on the TV. It was VHS. And I watched, I think, just the end of the film. So the scene where Jean Grey is holding back the dam and stuff like that. That's where I kind of walked in on the film and everything like that. So that was kind of my first memory of X-Men. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, like the effects and stuff like that they're using. So I went back, went and got the VHS of the first two films, which I think I may still have in the house somewhere. I'll need to have a look at them. But my first experience going to a cinema and watching it was X-Men 3: The Last Stand. And it's safe to say a little bit disappointed coming out of the cinema. It wasn't what I was expecting it to be. Even though I was quite young, I still kind of understood that maybe this wasn't the best that they could have done with the film. Not exactly the way that I wanted the film kind of series to end in that sense. And for me, I thought that was it. There was going to be no more X-Men films. They've told the story. And I kind of accepted the fact that, okay, those are the X-Men films. That's all we're going to get. At least I'll have the first two films to kind of go back to and watch and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, we're going to be jumping around this thing. I don't think we want these to be too review based, but I think inevitably we are going to slip into our own thoughts and we will get into some kind of review territory. We do want to keep this like a big sort of overview. And by God, we'll be getting into thoughts on X-Men 3 later on. But if we bring it back to the first one, so as George mentioned, I think Blade was sort of the first one that kickstarted. I think that was like 98, 99. I think that came out. I might be wrong about that. But that was the first one that sort of made it. But X-Men was huge. You know, you've got the concept, you've got this huge team of superheroes, massive ensemble cast. Look at the cast they got for this thing and the talent behind it. You had Sir Ian McKellen, you had Sir Patrick Stewart as sort of like your main two figureheads of your good guys versus evil guys, and a bunch of supporting talent as well, which was amazing. And I mean, I looked at the budget for this thing, and even when you watch the movie, you get the sense that it's not this big. It hadn't found its footing yet. The genre hadn't found its footing, this big grandiose thing. I know in the past you had stuff like Superman the movie and Batman and everything like that, but that was kind of in like the late 70s, 80s. But in terms of the new modern look, the budget for this thing, the first X-Men movie, was only 75 mil. And you can kind of tell on screen, you know, you watch it now, and I don't think it's particularly aged well. Especially, I don't think even in its own franchise, let alone what you see now with comic book movies, what Marvel are doing and everything with that. But I think where the strengths of the first X-Men film lie is that the tone that was set for it, and this concept of, you know, you look at the comic books, you look at all these colorful characters and everything, or you look at the cartoon show, and then you've got to take that concept, which might be ridiculous to a lot of people, and you've got to make people connect with it and have an emotional reaction to it. And you see that from the opening scene. Like, you think X-Men, you'd open with some like big explosions and battles in the streets with everything, with all of your favorite characters. You open at a concentration camp at Auschwitz with a young Magneto. And right then, if you're going into this thing with all your expectations for what you think of X-Men or movies in general, comic book movies, completely blown out of the water in the first scene.
Yeah, and I think when you go back to those sort of years as well, you know, even looking at the photos, the post, I mean, I can't sit and say I knew the marketing scheme. I was, you know, sort of 4 years old. I didn't know anything about this. And you think, you know, it's not bright colored. It's not today's posters. It's not today's marketing. Even the latter X-Men films, it's not that. This was straight up, and I mean, this is more the trilogy, but it's adult themes in these comic book films. And I think X-Men, I know that Spider-Man 2 touches upon, obviously, Peter Parker and lifestyle and choices, but comic book films, bar the Dark Knight trilogy, I don't think have delved into real life politics. Even Dark Knight's not really real life politics. That's more sort of contextual to like terrorism and stuff. But X-Men is outright racism. It's class structure, and it covered them from minute one, as you mentioned, the Holocaust of that first film, all the way up until the later films. Arguably, it stopped after 2014. Obviously, then you've got Logan. With the epilogue, which we do have to get to later, but X-Men has had the maturity that the other films can't get, and I don't think they'll ever be able to get again, because people don't want, not necessarily dark or brooding. Obviously, right now, with everything that's happening in the political movements, when they bring up the sort of the race and whatnot, it was so relevant then, and people just didn't see it. And obviously, people went to the cinema and saw it, but I don't think X-Men had that respect that it got to years down the line. And certainly for our age demographic, when we grow older, you realize that, hold on, this is actually teaching us quite a bit. Same sort of vibe with the Harry Potter films. As a kid, it's just, it's a really fun kids film and stuff. And you grow up as like they're teaching you stuff, and it's right there in your face, but it's not too in your face that you're not enjoying the film. Mm-hmm. And I think there's credit for that, for the choices they did in that, because ultimately that's the whole point, the whole hero versus villain, Professor X versus Magneto. They want the exact same goal, but it's the methodology in which they do it. And it's such a mature topic. And I think the first one, I don't think handles it as well as the second and third. Oh, I don't know, didn't mean third, but the first one is perfect for an opening film to sort of get you in the gist of it. And obviously it develops further and further. I've not seen this in quite a while, so I was tempted to watch afterwards. Yeah. I just didn't get time. But X-Men 1, I think, did a lot, and it doesn't have that. As you mentioned, you had Superman, you had Batman. X-Men doesn't get that respect. And I think it's because it came out in such, not an awkward time, but it was this middle ground between the popularity and between what we have now. And I think a big thing to talk about really quickly is one of the reasons that, why did Fox still have X-Men? Why does Sony still have Spider-Man? Marvel went bankrupt in the late 90s. The only reason Marvel is still a company is because they had to sell the film rights to basically anyone that wanted to make a film. So obviously, straight away, Sony and Fox, two of the biggest film companies at the time, sweep in, take the two biggest Marvel properties. Because believe it or not to sort of take the mix when I'm watching it younger than us, the Avengers were never, ever the biggest Marvel property. They are now, and absolutely they're right to be now. But on paper, they weren't Marvel's sort of, this is our everything. It was always been, I think, Spider-Man and X-Men. And that's why it showed him buying the rights for these films too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
and the fact that... Oh, sorry, Tayte, no, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, these films, the characters of Professor X and Magneto were based off Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Mm. So there is that kind of deep political and race issue kind of structure built into the characters themselves. So we're always going to get that in the films. And I'm glad that with the first film, it was able to just portray that, to be able to get that message across and also have it as a superhero film, something that people can at least connect with, maybe in a way that they wouldn't do normally back then. The first film has become, I feel, more relevant in recent years. And I know that the X-Men franchise is rebooted a couple of times, but it always seems to find itself being relevant every time it reboots. And I'm sure when we get around to talking about it, when we get to First Class, we can draw the parallels between First Class and the first X-Men film and everything like that, and what the two films basically achieved. But with this film, it was that kind of dark brooding kind of territory. We had Blade, which was like the bloody violence kind of areas of things, and then we had this franchise, which filled in that kind of dark brooding slot. It still had cheesy jokes in it. One of the things I remember from watching it was the joke that Storm makes towards Toad about what happens when the Toad gets hit by lightning.
One of Joss Whedon's most infamous contributions to a movie, I think. Even back then, was dipping his toes into the comic book world. But I think in terms of its cast, I think that's truly where the strength of the X-Men franchise lies. And I think Fox knew that. Obviously, the first movie introduced us to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, which, I mean, ask anyone. I think anyone would be hard pressed to think of another actor that could play Wolverine at this point. He has
him a horrific job.
And even I would say like Patrick Stewart as well as like Xavier. Like I don't know anyone. I know obviously McAvoy has played a younger version of that character, but if you're talking about the Professor X that we know, I think the casting, whoever got this cast together, did an absolute tremendous job, to the point where even like 17 years later, you still had Patrick Stewart and you still had Hugh Jackman in the film. And if that doesn't say, it was still bringing people in, people still loved those characters. And I know people now even would love to see Hugh Jackman come back as that character, as Wolverine, in the new MCU. Now Disney have the rights back to the franchise. But I think it's time for a fresh reboot, but it just goes to show the longevity these films had. I think in terms of like my overall, before we move, we should probably move on to like X2 and X3 at this point. I think the faults with this one, the first one, lies with the story, and the action does not hold up well. And I would even go so far as to argue that maybe in terms of on-screen action with the X-Men, they didn't hit their stride until maybe elements of The Last Stand or even X-Men First Class, where you really see these characters all working together and it being an actual spectacle, and it doesn't feel like kind of like a TV show fight sequence, which I know that the X-Men films were kind of marred with a little bit. Yeah. But ultimately, yeah, it does go into all those themes, but the plot is still Magneto wants to create a mutant island on Liberty Island and turns a senator into a giant jellyfish man. You know what I mean? So it's the plot is the weakest thing. I honestly can't. The plot's all over the place with this first one, but it set the standard. It was a good sort of, this is your first movie. Now go on to bigger and better things. And then we fast forward 3 years and we do get that.
And I think one other thing, sorry, just to jump in, you mentioned the cast as well. Now, in the year 2000, obviously, we know and love Hugh Jackman. He was an unknown what's his name? God, Russell Crowe turned down the role of Wolverine. And I need to check, I believe Russell Crowe recommended Hugh Jackman to the producers. I think he'd done a bit of theatre in Australia, probably America or something. But the cast, like I said, you had McKellen, you had Patrick Stewart, who were still big names at the time. And obviously, this is also before Lord of the Rings. We know it's been filming, but I think Ian McKellen is still very much here as a legendary British actor that hasn't done his big blockbusters yet. Obviously, he's filmed Lord of the Rings, but it was a very different era. Patrick Stewart's obviously in Star Trek, and it's the fact they had these young actors that X-Men reminds you of Band of Brothers, that if you take these, a lot of the young actors, now they're established 20 years later, but a lot of them were kids when they started this. It was their breakthroughs, and it's incredible, like looking over this 20-year time. And even look at First Class, they had big names that were up and coming, but they weren't as unknown as they were in the first X-Men film. And now a fair few of them, I think, is politely put, are household names, but X-Men's always had that additional thing. And like I said, credit goes to everyone involved in the production on the first. Like I said, it's not the best one. The jellyfish scene is something I'll never forget. I don't know if it's for the right or wrong reasons, but I don't mind it. For
a bit of both, probably. You know, a little bit of both.
You want to get contextual. Like, oh, look, Darth Maul was really cool in Star Wars last year. Let's bring him in as a Toad.
Yeah.
It doesn't get more sort of Fox than that, I guess we can say.
So for me, before we went onto this stream, this was the only film where I had to actually kind of research up what the plot was. And I've seen this film 2 or 3 different times, and I still don't really recall all the elements of the plot. The plot is really weak. It's very basic. All I can remember from this film in itself is the final battles on Liberty Island. That's about it. They play chess every now and then. It's just like, that's all I remember from this film, which doesn't say that it's not a good film, because it is a good film. But at the same time, it's not a ridiculously memorable film. Whereas later on films, even the ones which aren't as good, are more memorable in their own ways.
So moving to a more memorable X-Men movie, at least in my opinion, we go to X-Men 2. So 3 years later, we get this one. As I already mentioned, this was the one that I went to the cinema, and you just know when a film's going to be awesome. And I knew this film was going to be awesome from the opening scene. I don't think you can do an X-Men 2 discussion without talking about that opening scene. Nightcrawler's attack on the White House is still up there as one of the best comic book movie scenes. The music, the way it's shot. This is where you start seeing the money on screen. And Nightcrawler was always one of my favorite characters. I thought they absolutely nailed him. I love the casting of Alan Cumming, I believe, is the actor who plays him. The makeup looks great. Everything from that opening scene, I was like, okay, this is what I wanted from the first X-Men movie. Here we are now in the second one. And you definitely do see that increased budget. You know, I think we're probably playing with, I think it's like 125 mil in the second one. Clearly the first one did well, and the studio was like, they probably hedged their bets because they didn't know how a comic book movie of that scale would go over. It was a hit. People responded to it right. Put more money into it now. And I think this one, for better or worse, you could argue, did kind of set the trend for the X-Men movies in that it does make Wolverine the main character pretty much in every single one. This was the one that I think cemented him as the bankable character. Obviously, Hugh Jackman's career was on the up and up at this point. He was getting more and more hits. He was more of a box office draw. And I think it works for this movie. Obviously, X-Men is an ensemble cast and it's a team-based thing, but I do think the movies from this point onwards do tend to focus more on him. Obviously, you get his origin story in this one with William Stryker. Ironically, like 6 years before we actually get his solo origin movie, kind of telling the same story, which was really pointless. But I think this is without a doubt one of the best X-Men films, like hands down. I think this one, I don't want to do like an Empire Strikes Back, but there's always the one film in the franchise which I think people latch on to, which kind of elevates it to like a different level. And I think X-Men 2 is that movie in the X-Men franchise.
Yeah, I think X-Men 2 is one that, again, I didn't see till quite late on. And this was at a point, I reckon this is early 2010s as well, by the way. This isn't like I saw it like, you know, like a year or two later. This was late to the party. This is, I think, in the build-up to Days of Future Past announcement. And X-Men 2 had that sort of, you know, it's the Spider-Man 2, it's the Dark Knight, it's the Empire, it's done everything for this franchise and more. And I'm not saying it sets an unrealistic expectation, but it sets almighty high expectation, and it delivered on that. And it's what you mentioned, that opening scene. If you want to be in the zone to start a film, something like that was just incredible. It had you gripped from the first go. And then you've got the film that goes with it. You've got the kind of, I guess you could say, the politest Wolverine brutal scene you could have for PG-13 as well, with the attack on the house. And again, it did all these things that, and I don't think it gets enough credit for it, because, as I said, Dark Knight became the staple of comic book film sequels, when a lot of people do forget X2 came 5 years before. And I think that's also why, it's the era of X2 had come out 10 years later, because it's still better than most comic book films out today. And it delved further into what you found out from the first film. It approached the themes. It took characters into new directions. And the Wolverine comparison's right, because he did become the lead. We'll talk about it a bit more in Days of Future Past. But personally, as someone that, you know, I've not read many X-Men comics. When I used to read a lot of comics, I read the main ones, the ones everyone read, like Dark Phoenix, Days of Future Past, you know, the obvious ones. So I'm going to sit here and say I know my complete history at all. But I know that on the film, I think Wolverine is far more bankable than Cyclops. And I've not seen the animated series. I really want to watch it. It's on Disney Plus. It's on my watch list. And I think Wolverine is just naturally a bigger on-screen talent. I don't think, and also because of what Hugh Jackman's done, not to get into the future of it and whatnot, but now Wolverine's admittedly the lead X-Men. It doesn't matter. They're not going to do a new X-Men film in 10 years' time and have Wolverine be second fiddle to Cyclops. That's the worry. So that's kind of my thoughts. X2 is a widow, because I don't have too much to say that I can add to the already big discussion, because it's in line with everyone else's that it's one of the best ones. It's certainly the best of the original trilogy. I hate saying it.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It is the best of the original trilogy. The action was completely upped from the original. I'd say the acting also maybe took a little bit of a leap up as well. I just like just the finale of this film. I know it was like one of the first films I'd ever seen of an X-Men film and stuff like that, but the characters that you see developed from the first two films being put in a situation where they actually feel at risk. I mean, you watch films, you watch superhero films, and you think, okay, the heroes are going to get out. Of course they're going to get out. All the heroes are going to get out. And this film threw us a curveball and said, well, no, not all the heroes always get out. And that's just something that kind of stuck with me, as I don't even know if it was the first film to do it as that part of kind of that trend of, or whether it even had influence over later films, especially with Marvel films, with having the whole, the snap and stuff like that, having a major character or a couple of major characters being completely taken out, and knowing that there would be a third film in the franchise and saying, well, you're going to have to wait and see what happens to the rest of the characters and everything like that in the next one. But I would definitely put this as the best from the original trilogy. But I wouldn't even put it in my top 3, which I guess we'll get onto when we discuss later with our rankings of all the films when we get through them. But I guess we move on to now
And you mentioned we wait to see what's come, and we did. We waited 3 years. Now, I know for you guys this is going to be a very different thing because you mentioned this was the first X-Men film you saw in the cinema. Did you guys see... So, George, I know you hadn't seen X-Men 1 or 2 before seeing 3. Tayte, you'd seen 2 already, but you hadn't seen 1?
I'd seen 1 and 2.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'd seen a bit of 2 and then went back.
Then you were there. So I remember opening day, the hype was huge. It was kind of like the final X-Men film. You know, again, it's like that end of the trilogy. We got that teasing shot from the end of the first one with the Phoenix under the water. It was like, oh, this is going to be good. And it wasn't. And the whole movie just wasn't. Now, we had a director shift with this one. We moved to... Brett Ratner from who was, I think he was originally touted as one of the ones who was going to direct the first X-Men movie, but then he passed on it, and fate, life finds a way, or whatever the line is from Jurassic Park. Number one, the runtime for this movie felt really short to me. And it was the whole subversion of expectations. It was just everything. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen this movie, but it's all out there. The overly sort of like campy, quippy tone to it, mostly looking at, oh God, what's his name? Who played Juggernaut? Vinnie Jones, isn't it? Vinnie Jones as Juggernaut. That's one. Killing Cyclops off camera. I know a lot of people didn't like Cyclops, so they probably didn't give a shit, but he was always one of my favorites. Obviously, leader of the X-Men, director of the X-Men.
I haven't read the comics myself, but I know that he is meant to be the leader.
Yeah. So, even the fact they just killed him off camera. I remember distinctly being in the cinema like, no, he's going to come back. We haven't seen him die, and he never came back into it. And characters losing powers like Mystique, like midway through the movie and everything like that. And I don't know if I should be annoyed about stuff like that, because fair play to the movie, for better or worse, it took chances. It went, you know what, we are going to take Mystique out of the movie. We are going to completely remove her powers and everything like that. At the very end of the movie where, Xavier dies in there as well halfway through the film. The movie took chances and wasn't afraid to kill off characters. I just think if they were banking on like a long-term X-Men franchise, that's probably not what you should do.
They must have known it was the last film.
Yeah,
I think they did.
Got in with that kind of, this is the last film, let's just go bonkers and kill off as many characters as possible, and make the most divisive film we can.
Mm-hmm. And I guess a name that we should put a pin in right now, because he's going to come back later in our discussion, is co-written by Simon Kinberg. Remember that name. He will be coming back. There are moments of this movie that I like. Number one, oh God, I need to bring his name up because I've completely forgotten it, and I can't believe I have. Kelsey Grammer as Beast. My God, makeup-wise, casting-wise, you could not get a better actor to play him. He was the best thing in the movie for me. It was great to see Beast there. He was fully realized. He looked fantastic. I love the opening scene with Angel, where it's actually really grim. Like, I remember he's got like some kind of file and he's like soaring and clipping his wings. Really, really nasty stuff. But that stuff's good. You know, it's not afraid to go those places. Yeah. And then the character's just worthless and just disappears out of the movie. There's so many things wrong. You've got all the faceless villains, the Brotherhood of Mutants and everything like that. And then the end fight, I remember being very anticlimactic. It's just kind of a punch 'em up at an industrial estate, and that's it. I guess you do have the bridge sequence. You do have the bridge, which is probably that's you open with that, which is the best thing, and then the rest of the fight is just forgettable after that. I don't know. I can understand the hate this movie gets. It'd be interesting to go back to this one to see if it is as bad as some of the ones later down our list. I haven't had that luxury of going back and watching The Last Stand. Yeah. I don't know if I particularly want to, but I can see both sides.
Always on TV. It's one of those films. You know, there was that set in the UK. I don't know if our American viewers will know this, but on UK we have channels which most of the time have like trash TV on. Think your Love Island and your like Come Dine With Me and whatever it is, reruns and stuff like that. They will always have some action film playing on in the background. And this is one that comes up pretty much every month. I will always see, X-Men Last Stand. I don't know whether it's because it's really cheap to get the rights to the film to air it or not, but it always seems to be on. So I always catch glimpses of the film, but never actually watching the whole film. Again, I have seen it since seeing it in cinema. And yeah, my kind of first thoughts on it were met with, yeah, I was right. It isn't a good film. And I have to say, the stuff with Angel at the start was very good. I liked the angle of the whole kind of, he's the son of this like politician who's very anti-mutant, but he is a mutant himself and he's mutilating himself. It's that if they'd run with that and gone with kind of that whole plot line of mutant acceptance and everything like that, it just fell apart, didn't it?
I like elements of, I mean, there's that mutant who they find a cure, don't they? And you've got different pockets of mutants, you know, Rogue, for example, whose power gets in the way of her personal life and relationships and everything like that. She wants the cure, but then there's other mutants that say, well, we shouldn't have to fit in. We should be proud to be who we are. That stuff's good. And I would have liked to have seen them run with that a little bit more. It's just all the stuff around it. You've got the thrown in love triangles with Kitty Pryde and Iceman and Rogue, just completely pointless. It just doesn't stay with you. Yeah.
The same trap that Spider-Man 3 falls into, with there being too much happening.
I was going to bring that up. It's a very good comparison because if you actually mirror the two trilogies side by side, I mean, Spider-Man 1's a million times better than X-Men 1. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2 elevated it to the next level, as did X2. Spider-Man 3 was the final act in said trilogy, as was X-Men 3. Obviously, X-Men 3 was last stand. That is like the final. I better calling it Spider-Man 3. You've spun your last web, so it's not that at all. I said this before when we spoke about Spider-Man on and off stream. If X-Men 3 came out in 2020, it would not be anywhere near as bad received and spoken about as it is in 2000. Was it 2006 it came out? God.
Yes.
2006, yeah.
10, Christ. You had one comic book film a year if you were lucky. Not 3 if you're lucky, 4 if you're lucky, 5, Christ. No, but it was 1 if you're lucky, you'll get one. And they weren't even a genre at that point. They were just films. They were action films with a superhero tag. And obviously the expectation that comes with the others and not having these films so often added to the expectation. Now, again, I said X-Men 1 and 2. I didn't know any expectation. I didn't know what review was. I had no idea. And I think this is the big divide. It's actually I reckon at the bottom. Because I have no issues with X-Men 3. Obviously, I've watched it in recent years and it's not as good. It's definitely not as good. And I can see where everyone's furor comes from with this and their anger. And I would have probably been the same, but it's
had to be that.
this is what I'm saying. It was very much the nostalgic point that because it was my first experience of X-Men, not that I take it easier on it, but I didn't get the attachment between films. It'd be like if you watch Return of the Jedi and you hadn't seen 4 or 5. I mean, it's still excellent, but well, no, I'm not comparing it to excellent, but you know what I mean? You couldn't watch 6 and not 4 and 5, and that's why I think Last Stand I've always been very easy with, and I've also got a bit of sort of sadness not sadness, but that was the first ever Blu-ray I bought. I don't know if anyone remembers the PS3, where you would buy a PS3 and you'd get a Blu-ray, and basically every single PS3 unreleased had X-Men, and I was like, oh my god, what is a Blu-ray? And I remember putting it on, and it didn't work because you didn't have a HD TV in 2007. And I just remember it took me like a year and a half to be able to watch it, and it's still there. It's right down there. I've only not got 4 X-Men films, which I'll speak on later on, but it's another nostalgia memory that comes with it. So I get all the criticisms of it, but I think in my head, it would have been like watching Apocalypse and not watching First Class or Days of Future Past. But I would actually love to go back and watch now, because now we're talking, I really want to start watching the X-Men films again. But yeah, I think it was the end, and obviously then you get your prequels, I guess, which we'll get to in a bit. But I think as a final one, you mentioned, they weren't hesitant to kill people. And because I didn't have a clue who was who and whose relationship was with who, obviously no one's death had any impact on me at all. But I remember being creeped out at the opening scene with the file. I remember the weird blowfish guy.
Yes, yeah.
It was really cool. It was stupid, but it was really funny because, he'd turn into a giant fish and kill everyone. And I just remember the immortal wisdom from Ian McKellen that I used to play chess for the rest of my life. The pawns go first.
Yeah.
And you don't send the king out or the queen to wipe them all out. You send the pawns out. Immortal line from a great scene.
The problem with that is he was always a character who you could kind of reason with. He was a character who you could take the side of and you could understand where he was coming from. The second he said that line, I immediately hated him. There was always that, when watching the films, there was always that thing of, well, he's not completely wrong here. He is fighting for his rights. It's the way that he's fighting for his rights and stuff like that. And then suddenly it became, he is basically a brutal warlord sending people off into war in front of himself. And I never saw that as a character decision that Magneto would ever make. So for me, at least, I don't like that line.
I can see it. I don't think, I couldn't imagine Magneto choosing to, I know he wants equality. Well, not equality. He wants domination, but I can imagine him going in the front line. Not at his age in that film too. No offense to Ian McKellen, but he's not Michael Fassbender. He can't pull down some helicopters magically on a green screen studio. And obviously, the also funny thing that I always forget, which is stupid, is how every gun was plastic in the space of like one day.
That's right.
Every weapon was plastic. It's like, well, that's one way to write out his incredible ability. Again, X-Men 2, Pete's using metal. Once you do that scene in X-Men 2 in the prison, you can't ever do a scene involving metal as good because, there was literally none of it, and he got one of the best action scenes in the entire X-Men franchise from it.
Mm-hmm. So following this, it did have that sense of finality to it. And I mean, you probably had a lot of highly paid people at Fox going, what do we do with the X-Men franchise now? Well, Wolverine's bankable. Let's make a movie on him. And I remember seeing reports that they wanted to do an X-Men Origin. They wanted X-Men Origins to be the caption. They wanted to do a whole series. And I know they were planning on an X-Men Origins Magneto, Jean Grey. They were probably going to go through the entire cast of characters and just make it like an ongoing thing.
I remember seeing a lot of rumors around an X-Men Origins Cyclops for a while.
Yeah, I think that came after Wolverine. I remember the big two first was Wolverine, and then it was going to be Magneto. And obviously, we'll get into them. But I think it was, Cyclops was a big one. I think Storm had rumors. Mm-hmm. Everyone in X-Men got a rumor for something because you're right. You didn't, obviously you can milk a franchise back in 2008, but again, there was no MCU in 2006. There was no cinematic universe. Even Fast and Furious was at 3 films in that year. It wasn't, you didn't get that. Let's just continue. And I think that's when you tell with Wolverine, because I'm going to take the lead on this, guys. Sorry.
Go for it.
X-Men Origins Wolverine, I have very, very fond memories. Now, this is also an age thing. I was 12 turning 13. Does anybody here remember remember you used to get a demo on a PS3 for free?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the Wolverine game demo?
It was very good. It was violent. It was more violent than the movie.
It was more violent than even Logan. It was the most incredible demo in the history of games ever made. The game was probably terrible. I wasn't allowed it because it was rated 18. And I remember the excitement for that Wolverine film was, oh my God, Wolverine's getting a film. I remember back in the day, you'd watch like TV in the morning before school, and there'd be Hugh Jackman interviews of him making weird noises and he's shredded, and that trailer shot of him coming out of the bathtub and everything. And X-Men Wolverine had this massive hype to it, and like I said, that game just elevated it to another level. So I remember going to the cinema to watch this, and I loved it. And I'm not afraid to say, at the time, I think that's the big thing. And I just remember being blown away. And obviously, we'll all talk about, again, what do the X-Men films tend to do very well? Opening scene. The first, except the fact it was really funny when he starts screaming at his sort of kind of dad. It was the montage scene was wonderful. And you had the amazing X-Force scene, I guess you can say. And then I remember it going downhill big time. Obviously, you got sad when the old people died. But I guess you knew it was coming. But I just remember that film in a very different manner of, because I had obviously a different eye, it's really cool as a 12-year-old watching something like, it's the kind of film a 12-year-old's going to go to the cinema with his 12-year-old mates, and it's cool because he's killing people in this, and you don't know film, like that's the big thing. And obviously as years gone by, I remember I was really scared to rewatch it because I knew that when I did, I wouldn't like it, and that did become the case. At that age, Black Eyed Peas were one of my favorite bands, so having will.i.am was really cool, and then the Black Eyed Peas, not that you get over it, but obviously Fergie leaves, and the music goes downhill, and your taste gets better too. But then you realize, why is will.i.am in this? And then you get to the Deadpool era. It's like, why? Well, wait, he was meant to be Deadpool the entire time. Like, he had a cool scene, and nothing happened. Then you got the guy from Lord of the Rings that popped up for no reason. Yeah. He was controlling the funfair. And, you look back, it's abysmal. But I will say that as a 12-year-old, and many 12-year-olds will love a film like that. But it is bad. It's very, very bad.
I will never understand why the entire film, or the action sequences at least, look like they were directed by a Bollywood director. Because honestly, everything is so over the top and bombastic and completely out of the realm of thought or possibility. It feels so detached from the X-Men franchise. Even in The Last Stand, at least you felt like you were watching a film with X-Men mutants in it. And you felt like you were watching an X-Men film. It was just a bad one. This one didn't even feel like any sort of X-Men film at all.
I seem to remember this one. Didn't this one get leaked early with like unfinished effects in there and like green screen stuff? I swear I remember seeing like that helicopter scene with like unfinished effects in there.
I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember it. Again, age thing. I wouldn't have known stuff like that.
This is probably the one film. Okay, apart from the later ones, maybe this is.
This almost killed X-Men.
This probably did kill X-Men until they came up with the idea of completely starting from scratch.
Well, that's also an interesting conversation because Fox got lucky. Summed up. We'll get to that. But yeah, Wolverine is, again, it was meant to be, oh, look, you've seen him smoke cigars in X-Men, so watch him smoke cigars in this film. And here's Deadpool. And I guess, imagine today's internet watching Deadpool with no mouth, being sellotape shut. I know he made stupid jokes in Deadpool 2 where he goes back in time and kills him. And I don't think that was very funny. Like, I get the point. He thought it was rubbish, Ryan Reynolds. I get the point. He thought Green Lantern was rubbish, Ryan Reynolds. But you can't change history. There weren't funny gags. Anyway, different conversation.
For me, this one sort of started setting the stage for. I mean, to be fair, this was probably already a thing in the first three between movies. The awful continuity between the X-Men films, and this is where it started compounding on itself for me because not only did I think this film was pointless when it came out, I was like, we got his origin in X-Men 2. You get the flashbacks. You have all the William Stryker stuff. That is literally what that movie is based on. You've covered it. You did it great. And you're just kind of going back and giving us the same thing. And is it still set in the same universe? Obviously, you've got Hugh Jackman in there. I remember at the end of the movie, you get a really awfully digitally de-aged Patrick Stewart who shows up. And I think he doesn't he get Cyclops or some... There's some mutant that they rescue at the end. That
you'll ever see. It's so
that's
weird.
It. So you have the moment... Go on, sorry.
It reminds me of Solo, when there's like really cheese. I'm like, oh, you want to do good in the world, Han Solo? It's like, nah, I'm smug. Let's move on. You can all be rebels. And obviously, this is 10 years before, but it was that awful vibe. Like, watch me save. Were they all in cages? Like, was like every young mutant that ever lived born to be a child at the same age?
And it's just stuff like that. But the biggest offender for me was switching Brian Cox with Danny Huston for William Stryker. I remember watching it going, that's not my William Stryker. Like, who's this guy? Nothing against Danny Huston. He's a great actor. But just in that role, just paled in comparison. And also, probably one of the best things about this movie, but again, another switch from X-Men 1. And then you start thinking about the timeline and everything like that. Liev Schreiber as Sabretooth. Now, we had Sabretooth in the first movie. There's definitely more to him as a character in this one. They play up the brother angle, which I really liked. That was some of the best stuff. But again, it didn't... The elements that do fit in and elements that don't fit in, so you kind of view it as a separate thing, but they want it to be a prequel. And there's just so much going on with it. And obviously, we need to talk about Ryan Reynolds. We mentioned it a little bit with Deadpool in this movie. I didn't realize that was Deadpool as a kid. I thought it was just a guy with swords who comes back for a really awful boss fight at the end. How they okayed that, why they even chose to put his character in and do that with his character. Obviously, that's the butt of many jokes when we finally get to Deadpool many years down the line. But I hated this movie on day one. The Blob as well. What was going on with that scene?
Boxing fight with the Blob. It was like,
and he calls him Bub, but he thinks he calls him Blob, and it's God. This is. I haven't gone back and rewatched this movie. I think I've seen it the once, but I did appreciate all the jokes in Deadpool directed towards it.
This one for a far future drunk watch along.
It is. Oh, CGI claws. CGI claws. What was all that about?
Yeah.
They look awful. I literally hate this. One of my most loathed comic book movies. I think it was The Pits.
It was bad, but here's the thing: I don't think there would have been the success that they've had afterwards with the X-Men without having this film. I think it was the kind of shot of, okay, X-Men Last Stand wasn't a fluke. We really are out of ideas. We've got to completely redo this franchise. And I guess for Deadpool, I genuinely don't think the Deadpool film, if they nailed Deadpool first time in the film, do you really think we would have the current incarnation? No, not a chance. So I think this film was a necessary evil, shall we say. It was needed for us to fully appreciate the good X-Men films, to know kind of how low they could go.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it still made a lot of money as well.
I think it did. Let me just have a look.
It made more. If we guys want to
double its budget, just over double its budget.
It made. If you guys want a comparison to move on to a nice conversation, then this made more money than First Class.
No, I don't like that. I
can see why though, because it's thing. It's the posters, it's it's the whole thing. So,
and are we all ready for First Class?
Yeah. I'd say this is kind of like your second phase of the X-Men franchise. I would say. I think like you've got the first, you've got the 3 in Origins as it's one thing, and this was them trying to move it in a different direction.
This film has aged unbelievably well. I want to get off the bat and say that straight away. It's probably the X-Men film I've watched the most. It isn't my overall favorite, but it's in that kind of top bracket. This is a fantastic film. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed watching the origins of these characters. I like the way that some of the elements of the characters being worked into it and everything like that. Introducing characters from the comics which hadn't been put into the films yet and everything like that. I really enjoyed it. The only few things which I dislike about the film are really kind of literally lines of dialogue, tiny little lines of dialogue. Everything else about the film is perfectly acted, perfectly well done. I love Kevin Spacey as a villain. Oh, not Kevin Spacey. Sorry, Kevin Bacon. Sorry, Kevin Bacon as the villain.
I want to see that movie now.
I think he's surprisingly menacing for Kevin Bacon. Because we haven't really seen him as a villain in many other films. I like what they've done with Magneto and Professor X. I think that they have played very well. I know you can't replace Sir Patrick Stewart and Sir Ian McKellen, but both actors do a fantastic job of portraying a younger version of themselves. And I really enjoyed that element of it.
I think that's a perfect start for this film. One of the reasons this didn't do well is because it wasn't Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. That's no fault of anyone's. That's not criticism. To market this film, this came out in like May 2011. I didn't see this at the cinema. I don't know what people were expecting.
The only marketing I heard from this film was the Take That song that was released with it.
Yeah, and pretty good song, back to back with the one from Stardust. Yeah. Again, another Matthew Vaughn film.
I know.
I think the entire success of this film comes down to Matthew Vaughn, and we'll talk about this in Days of Future Past as well. They got lucky with him. Now, we can say what we want about Kingsman 2. To me, he's had a very, very, very solid career. He's been able to make choices he wants to make. First Class shouldn't have worked. No one was speaking about it. And what did they do? They did what the great X-Men films did. They brought in some real-life history stuff. I was learning Cuban Missile Crisis at school when this came out. So this was really topical. And it's obviously it's not real, of course. But it brought, again, the class side of it. It brought in the sort of the politics that it's not directly in your face, but it begins this relationship between the mentor, the friend. This really, I remember the trailers when it would have the silhouette of the wheelchair. If anyone can remember that, they had posters as well, and it was just. I'm not saying it's marketed bad, but I think because of Wolverine, because that put a lot of people off. Obviously, it got awful reviews. I don't think anyone was looking forward to this because it's, on paper, you've just had Last Stand followed up by Wolverine, and now you're getting another origin story.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Fassbender and Mcavoy have done other projects, but I don't think they had the respect and reputation they do now. It's not because of this. This was a very good point in their career, the pair of them, where this was we're doing our dramas, but we're going to get our franchise to go with the dramas to help elevate. So a lot of them do that. Nothing wrong with that. This film had no right being as good as it was. It didn't have an A-lister villain. You had Kevin. I almost said the same one then. You had Kevin Bacon, the immortal "I'm Sebastian Shaw" trailer line. Not Sebastian Shaw, the Winter Soldier actor, an actual X-Men villain. For those who are confused, because that's also now a thing too, apparently. I think it was great. Every X-Men character felt like they were there to contribute to the story from the specific people he picked for both of them. It didn't feel like anyone was there because they had to be there. I don't think they chucked in characters for the sake of chucking in characters. Everything felt written to a good point. And because you have these sort of the politics go along with it, it just added to the story. And then you have the incredible confrontation at the end. One of the greatest shots of all the X-Men franchises. Magneto, the coin, everything on the Magneto with the hand up, when everyone back in the day was like, this is why he should be in Star Wars, because of that pose. It was a really good film, and obviously we'll get into our favourites later on in the end of the video, but First Class, I think, saved this franchise, or at least let's say it gave it some legs for a little bit longer. And again, I'll let Chris speak, so he hasn't, but off the back of this, we then get the Wolverine, which also helps to elevate it, but I'll go to Chris for First Class.
First off, Sebastian Shaw, Star Wars, my friend. Sebastian Stan's MCU. It's just when you mentioned Star Wars, I was just like, oh yeah, there we go. So actually, this is kind of different for me, because I remember seeing trailers for this thing and wanting no part of this movie. I was angry that it was kind of getting this. Well, I thought it was a reboot at the start. I guess it's a soft reboot. You'd probably classify it as, because I wasn't expecting. I don't think anyone was expecting some of the callbacks that you do get in this movie, and I do love some of them, and I'll go into those in a couple of my favorite moments. But I remember being completely against this. I was like, James McAvoy as Patrick Stewart, what? Like Fassbender, like over Ian McKellen, what? Because that cast was so near and dear to me, and the nostalgia of that cast of that trilogy that we had. Even with how awful 3 was, how awful Origins was, I was still invested in those characters, and I didn't want to see them completely do it apart and do a reboot of it. So I went into this with no expectations at all. I actually kind of went into this movie with a very negative attitude. And then the opening scene happened, and I know it was reshot. It wasn't. It kind of looked similar to the footage that was shot for the first X-Men film. It was back at the concentration camp. I think they reshot it with new actors, but they framed it and they structured the scenes very much in a similar way. And I was like, oh, this is happening in the same. This is a prequel to the stuff that has come before. Obviously, Kevin Bacon as well. Really nice. Although Magneto is a main character in the film, and we do get those villainous tendencies, it was nice to see them do a villain that wasn't Magneto again and completely do the same thing again. The most fascinating thing in this film for me is that interplay between James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. I think when they share scenes together, even into the ones that are terrible, even when we start getting into the awful territory of X-Men, every time they're on screen together, they command your attention. It's the two sides of the same coin kind of thing, which is always fascinating. I think probably why people didn't gravitate towards this one more is the characters that you have in there. Obviously, because this is an origin story, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You can't have characters like Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey. Wolverine you can kind of have, and he does get a great cameo in there, which is probably my favorite bit of the movie. I thought they nailed that part. But you have characters like Banshee, Azazel, Havoc, like these names that people probably haven't heard of. And I will say that they're fine for what they do in the movie. And I think this was the first X-Men film that really nailed that team dynamic, that they're all working together, that they all have these collection of powers, using them for a given goal. And it was nice to see that. It was nice to see the yellow outfits, not just the normal black leather. This actually added some color into it, a bit more like the classic comic books. But they just nailed it on the story and everything like that. I think if I was going to throw any criticisms towards it, probably it got a bit sort of like checklisty at the end. It was like I would have liked to have seen a slow build. I would have been perfectly fine if Professor X wasn't crippled at the end of this movie, and you say save that for a second one, and you really developed it and dragged it out a bit more, but it felt like, right, we've got to get Professor X in the wheelchair. We've got to reference that he's going to be bald. We've got to have Mystique going off with Magneto at the end of the movie. We've got to have the school and everything like that, and in the wheelchair. And it just seemed like, well, I didn't need all this. You could have developed this out. As it stands, I think it's a solid movie. I do tend to watch Days of Future Past more than this one. I think just because you've got that perfect mix of the old X-Men with the newer team, and I thought they nailed that dynamic in the story they told. But as George said, like, this gave it legs and it gave it a new lease on life. Now, in hindsight, if you're going to reboot it, I think this was probably the time it should have been done.
I quite like the continuation. I quite liked what they did with the continuation, keeping the old kind of canon stuff from the films and saying, well, in X-Men there is the Days of Future Past storyline we can go to rewrite the story, and I'd say that was probably the reboot, if anything. They took the stuff, they basically rebooted the film mid-film, which is an unusual one. But
I think probably after Days of Future Past at the very least is where it should have got that reboot. And I think just going into this one, I think the time was right to do it. As it stands, they kind of had their foot in a reboot, but then also in the older stuff. So it still had its place in the original, and you could view it as a prequel. Obviously, that starts to not make any sense when you start skipping decades between movies, and that kind of compounds in on itself, especially by the time of Apocalypse, which we'll get into. But I think it's a solid movie. You've got all the talent. It's the usual crew that Matthew Vaughn works with. You've got Jane Goldman, who was one of the co-writers on there, and the soundtrack as well. Jesus Christ, that soundtrack, one of the best things about it. Not quite as good as the John Ottman score, the main theme that you get in like X2, which later comes back into it, but it's a fantastic score. The Magneto theme, Jesus.
I was going to say one thing we've not spoken about of X-Men. You don't really get music often, but the scene in the Argentinian bar, to me, is the greatest scene in all the X-Men films. I've said this so many times. It was the fact, again, just make it sound stupid, the fact they had the conversation in German. Yeah, they didn't, not that it's a maturity thing, but it could have been, they could have just put an accent on and pretended they were in English, and it just felt a bit more authentic. And, go back to the 60s, there were people hunting Nazis. That did happen. And it was just an incredible scene. And that's hinting, okay, we've seen Magneto in Auschwitz and we've seen what's happening. This is how he's developed, how he's becoming what he is. And I think it nailed what you needed to develop his character into what he becomes, because that's what you need to do in prequels. And the same with Charles, and there's just really good times. But the music is phenomenal. It's
and like Fassbender as well, coming off a couple of years after Inglourious Bastards as well. It kind of helped cement it a little bit with that, if you'd seen that movie at that point or around that point. But I think we should move on. So not straight away to Days of Future Past. We are moving on to another Wolverine movie. This is their second crack at another Wolverine movie. Can they get it right this time?
Yes.
Yeah. I think so.
I enjoyed this film. I enjoyed the feudal kind of Japan elements brought into modern day. I like the whole idea of him being kind of a lone samurai. This felt like the first kind of venture into, I'd say, kind of that classical kind of like Japanese, like films like Yojimbo and Seven Samurai kind of genre that inspired the westerns that we have. And I really enjoyed elements of this film. I really did. I wouldn't rate it as highly as some of the other X-Men films, but that's not to say that I didn't enjoy the film. I think it missed the mark on a couple of parts, but it's just an enjoyable film that you can just kind of stick on. It's kind of the middle ground X-Men film.
To me, the Wolverine would have been the best X-Men film had the final act not been the abysmal man in giant armor having fights. Yeah. I was so invested. The trailers looked amazing. It was nice to see a big American blockbuster going to somewhere like Japan. I know there's a famous Wolverine Japan story comics. It was going to be this big thing. We had the samurai stuff. We had the World War II throwback to the nuclear bomb. I remember everything about the build up to this. Then I just remember loving it. We got the post-credit scenes, I think, which we're gonna get to shortly, because that was a big thing, obviously, for teasing at what came next. But I think the Wolverine was not an apology for Origins, but this was kind of, okay, we know X-Men Origins wasn't good. Instead of throwing everything into it, we're just going to take him away from the familiar territory and have him go off, and as a spin-off film should be, one man on a mission and he will encounter other people. And the ending really lets it down, because I think, you've got these throwbacks to X-Men 3, you've got Famke Janssen coming in flashbacks, which again, criticism of the X-Men films was turning Wolverine and Dark Phoenix into a Leviathan, which makes Apocalypse's scene a bit more paedophilia than it needed to be, which we'll get to, I guess, as well. But I love this. And then one of my favorite things is it's not an R-rated cut, but it's rated 15 here. On the Blu-ray, I don't even want to say it's extended. It might be by a couple of seconds, but they were basically allowed. They did it to kind of the Hunger Games as well. They were essentially allowed to put the blood back in. So I think what it is, when the first cut or final first cut was done, I'm guessing this got submitted to the ratings companies, and it's you need to cut like 3 seconds and take some blood out, because you can't have your 12 without that. Obviously, PG-13 American. It doesn't add much, but it makes a big difference watching it, because when you're seeing people getting headshotted with crossbows on top of skyscrapers, it's really weird. You just see a crossbow go through the head, and I've made the point before, you don't need to chuck blood into a film for it to be cool, but it just, little bits here and there just added this difference to, again, this sort of lone samurai feel to it. The funeral scene is one of my favorite scenes from that film. I thought it was great. It felt different, and I think that's what this film needed to be.
I think it's a shame that we got Origins when we did, because I think that I would have loved to have seen a Mangold Wolverine trilogy, and I think as it is, we kind of have the two. They're not really connected in any way, and I think there definitely should have been a middle movie. It kind of tees up to that point at the end of this movie. I know there was a scrapped alternate ending where he gets given the classic yellow Wolverine costume, which would have been really interesting to see if they'd have done that in a movie. I don't know if it would have worked, but you could have maybe have had that as your second movie, and then obviously follow it up with the movie that we probably all want to talk about, Logan. This is still a movie, the Wolverine, that I've only seen once, and I haven't seen that R-rated cut, although I've heard that it's a lot better. And I think Wolverine is one of those characters that is suited to that more violent side of things. It'd be like if you're doing a Punisher movie and you take all the violence out of it. It just doesn't work. It kind of goes against the brutality of the character. I like the setting, and Wolverine's, it's very difficult to write Wolverine in an interesting way because he is invincible. He can regenerate. How can you make that an interesting conceit? It's kind of like the Superman thing, where it's very difficult to write Superman in an interesting way when you are dealing with an indestructible character. What can you do for his weakness? You either go for an emotional weakness, but with this one, it takes his power away. It says, be Wolverine without the power. Is this a choice that you want? And I think that's a very interesting choice for the character. I love the setting. I love the opening as well, with the nuclear bomb, which sets the whole story into motion. The weaker aspect is the villain side of things. You've got this no-name character, just Viper. I thought she was kind of weak as a villain. And then, as George mentioned, you had Silver Samurai at the end, who he fights against. Now, I get it, because it's a comic book movie. It's an X-Men movie. It's a Wolverine movie. You do kind of need some kind of big boss, or it's a comic book film. Punch 'em ups are expected. Obviously, I think that would be out of place in something like Logan, at least to this standard. If, like, say, Silver Samurai had just come like charging out of the trees at the end of Logan, that would have just completely ruined the film around it. As it stands, I don't think this ruins the film, but I do think it kind of pales into what the rest of the film was setting up beforehand. I love the train sequence, great action scene. I think this is a movie I'm probably going to have to go back to, actually, especially now I've seen it.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back and watch the R-rated cut, but the post-credit scene again doesn't really make any sense in the continuity when we get to the next film. I swear to God, I don't think the directors of these X-Men films or the studio watched their previous movies. No.
This would have come out immediately 1 year after, so I'm not even sure whether they probably were already filming the next film at that stage. So
I think Hugh Jackman did Wolverine back to back with Days of Future Past filming. That's why he was so ripped in Days of Future Past as well, because he had to keep that physique. And I think from what I remember, the credit scene wasn't Mangold. That was obviously filmed at the beginning of Days of Future Past for them to then chuck into the Wolverine credits, and kind of getting into that, because it's nice leeway for Future Past that the Avengers came out in 2012. and that's changed cinema. Cinematic universes, Ghostbusters, kind of Star Wars. What else is trying them, guys? Jurassic Park, maybe. DC, yeah, DC. Who'd ever forget that one? There's so many cinematic universes now. It's pathetic. And X-Men was, we're a comic book film. We have this amazing cast from 10 years ago that didn't get the ending they deserved, and we've just had all these big A-listers unite together for this third highest gross film in history. Why don't we merge, in all honesty, the most famous X-Men? I'm not going to say the most famous. I'd say probably in the top 3 X-Men comic books of all time, Days of Future Past. Let's do time travel. Let's bring in the old cast with the new, because First Class was such a big hit no one expected, as in critically as well. You got the original cast. That is a meeting destined for greatness. And you had Matthew Vaughn at this point in time with a story treatment who was going to do it, who obviously did First Class. Matthew Vaughn turned in, I believe it wasn't a first draft of a script, but he'd written the full treatment, and then he left the project to do Kingsman, because him and Mark Miller, he said, if I didn't direct Kingsman, I couldn't have directed Kingsman, and anyone can direct X-Men. He said something like that. And then they bring back Bryan Singer, which we'll get to a bit more in Apocalypse. I think is a fair comparison.
Yeah.
Days of Future Past should have been, obviously in hindsight, everyone kind of went into it, I think, politely expecting it's going to be a way to reset canon for X-Men to move on, and it did happen. I remember this day. I went to midnight screening. I had an A-level exam in the morning, which I failed, but I didn't care because I got to watch Apocalypse Days of Future Past at midnight, and it was an experience. Like I said, I don't have the nostalgia that you two had with that original trilogy. I didn't get to wait for films to come out of the cinemas, watching VHSs. But to me, reaching this point of where I was just like not in life, but like, I was like studying like film at like college and stuff, and I was like, here's all these great actors coming back, and now I can get excited to see them marketing for a film, and it's going to be this big event that we've had in film, and it was incredible. Putting it to the least. I'm going to hand this to Chris because I know you've got very passionate. We've spoken about this in the past.
Yeah, I was just reading about the. I didn't quite get to it, but I know that they originally had a trilogy planned, and I don't think Days of Future Past was meant to be the second one. I think that was going to be the final one, which would have made sense to me, and you would have had a middle one. We were talking about this before we went live, in that there's a lot of plot threads in this movie that are sadly dropped or breezed over very quickly between First Class and this movie. You had the entire cast, everyone from First Class has been killed off screen between movies, which does set the stakes for what we're dealing with this movie. But it is kind of a shame that we never got to see those characters grow into a second movie, which would probably have made their deaths or hearing of their deaths in this movie more impactful. So there's a few moments like this, but this is my favorite X-Men movie. This is almost perfect. This is one of my favorite comic book movies. It's definitely been my top 10. I don't want to. It's going to be funny to see how this goes. But when Bryan Singer was coming back to direct, I do remember it being a sense of, at the time, when we were all naive at that point, that it was like, it's like returning home. He's like got the reins back to, because we had the disappointing X-Men 3. He didn't return to direct that thing. It's like, right now he's going to steer the ship. He's going to bring us in. And he's going to end it with, big bang. And obviously, I'm looking at the story here. You've got Jane Goldman, Matthew Vaughn, so you still did have that element there that was mentioned. And worth noting, screenplay, sole credit, Simon Kinberg. So as much as we shit on the guy wrote a tremendous film, but I'm sure there are a lot of ghost writers there, and a lot of other people had input with it. They nailed this movie. This is a pitch perfect movie to me. And it's actually one of the first movies that I remember now. There's a lot of movies that have had like extended cuts and recuts and everything like that. But in terms of proper trailers and releases, the Rogue cut that came out that added added the whole subplot in with Rogue, probably about an extra 10 or 15 minutes or so. Depending on, sometimes I'll watch the Rogue cut. I don't have a preference between the two. I like the stuff that was added, but I can see how that does kind of slow the momentum down of the film compared to the theatrical cut. But just the balance between the old cast and the new cast, how they work it together. The scene that Patrick Stewart and James McAvoy share is one of the best scenes in the X-Men franchise to me. The soundtrack and everything, the setting, that again, the historical period that it's setting and merging that with real life events with the mutant stuff. It's incredible, and it doesn't have to go out its way to have like big bombastic action scenes. Yes, you have some cool stuff with the Sentinels at the beginning and throughout the movie, but it just ends with like a confrontation, just like with words at the end in a stadium with the Sentinels. You know, it's nothing grandiose. It doesn't have to be. It does exactly what it needs to be, and I think that the time that it's set in as well, the 70s aesthetic really does work for it. At this point, it didn't get to the ridiculous state that we get in Apocalypse, and then again with Dark Phoenix, although you could argue that this set the trend for that decade jump between movies. I can't sing this movie's praises enough. It just does everything.
This movie is fantastic. It's one of the only movies that I will always have in my DVD case when going on holiday and stuff like that. It's one of those kind of films you can just throw on, no context, just out of the way, put it on. It just brought together all of the things which we loved from the first kind of trilogy of the X-Men film, what we loved from both First Class and the Wolverine, and just combined it all together into just a fun, entertaining action film, a fun film where they're able to kind of get across one of the most confusing X-Men storylines and somehow make it not as confusing as you'd think. This was just a fantastic overall film. I can't really say much more other than the fact that I truly love this film. Still not my favorite X-Men film.
I remember there being some hokey things where I was like, okay, but they kind of work it into the plot. The fact that Xavier can all of a sudden walk again just because he's been injected with a secret serum, I'm like, that's not how it works, but okay. But they work with it and it's fine, and he's kind of this strung out junkie kind of angle they go for it, which I thought was really interesting to see. When the original cast fall to the Sentinels, it feels like there's actual stakes. You still have the pitfalls of nothing characters like Bishop's there, and we don't really know anything about him. He's just kind of there, but the Sentinel stuff's really cool.
I wish they did Victoria McKellen. He got how many lines you got in the film, but it wasn't that many.
They are dealing with such a huge cast though, so I think, and you know, they've kind of, he's had his story kind of thing in the original trilogy, so you do have to keep it mostly focused on the new. They changed some stuff from the comic books. I know that it's Kitty Pryde who is the one who travels back in time in the comic books, and they do kind of randomly conjure a new power out of whole cloth where she can move people's consciousness back through time when all she used to be able to do was just run through walls. It's fine for what it is. I don't care. I understand, again, the need to push Wolverine as the main character, have him be the time traveler, the fact that he doesn't age and everything like that. It makes sense. I love it. And talking about this movie now, I really want to watch it again.
Was this the first X-Men film to be nominated for an Oscar?
Oh, I'd be surprised if one of the others maybe wasn't for visuals, but it wouldn't also surprise me if it is the first.
Is it effects?
Even though I've said this isn't my top film, and we'll get into the list when we get to the end of this, it does have my favorite scene.
Yes.
Time in a Bottle, which is, I would honestly say, one of the best superhero scenes of all time. It's just, it's perfectly executed. It fits the character of Quicksilver perfectly. It's just, I don't know how they could have filmed it any differently, and it wouldn't be. It just wouldn't be the same. And I know they tried to replicate it in literally the next film in the franchise and the one after, but it doesn't hit the same as it did in this one.
Well, it's the law of diminishing returns, isn't it? You repeat a joke between sequels, it's never going to have the same impact as it did. But jokes, shall we move on to? Oh no, we're sticking with the other sequels, aren't we? Then we're grouping the spin-offs into the next thing, right?
Yeah, we'll move on to spin-offs into the next bit, I guess. We'll just
after we've done these two. First. We need to just rip the Band-Aid off with this one, don't we? So, Days of Future Past, end of the X-Men franchise, kind of.
You could have played time from Inception at the end scene. It should have had time from Inception on the end, and it was perfect. And then there should have been an epilogue. Logan, sorry. Back
when we did the review of this, because it was just me and Chris on for this review. Chris, do you remember what your stance in the film was?
I remember really not liking it.
That's incorrect. If you
I did not like this movie.
Today, guys, go back and watch our X-Men Apocalypse review. Chris, you said it wasn't that bad. It was bad compared to
it was schlocky. Yeah, but it's probably not. It's not the worst X-Men movie.
It's not the worst X-Men movie. Of course it isn't.
It's in the 3 bottom ones, but it's not the worst. I think I was just clinging on to that. I liked hearing the main theme. It was another X-Men movie, but I didn't like it by any stretch of the imagination. I like this movie.
So much wrong about this movie. They truly did. This movie, the villain, which looked really good. I remember watching the trailers and being really hyped for this film. Getting Oscar Isaac. I mean, Oscar
you were hyped off the trailer. Yeah,
I was hyped off the trailers. Yeah.
I remember when the set pictures came out of Apocalypse, I was like, "Oh,
it was the infamous EW San Diego Comic-Con special. First look at Apocalypse, aka the Power Ranger villain."
Yeah, it was like Ivan Ooze from the Power Rangers movie.
I was, and I'm not gonna lie, I keep saying, "Oh, there should have been an epilogue." We all wanted a sequel. They'd announced Apocalypse before Days of Future Past. Bryan Singer's name on the script. Worth mentioning that he did go AWOL during filming in this, and we're going to leave it there for you to fill in the blanks if you want to look at Wikipedia. Oh man, was the loss of Matthew? Because I didn't do our review. I don't know if I didn't do it because I hated the film that much, or if I just didn't do it for any other reason. But this was a horrible experience because this is also the only time I've ever been late to a cinema screening. I walked in when Poe Dameron had hair, and he was turning into a bold person.
That was the only scene.
Yeah, I'd missed a bit. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And then obviously the logo came up, and then the film. I was like, what on earth has happened here? I think that was the fairest way. They'd cast the young Storm, the young this, the young that, and I was like, Days of Future Past, we can start again. We can make things better the way they were supposed to be. All this kind of stuff. And oh man, Bryan Singer had full control over this film, and it tells. I'm sorry, the whole thing is everything. Days of Future Past, it's on Matthew Vaughn. I don't care now. Without Matthew Vaughn, I think X-Men would have died before. Apocalypse. Like I said, I haven't watched the show. I hadn't read the comics. I didn't know much about him. I know there's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, which in the credit scene of Days of Future Past was fine, and then it became 4 actual just kids with powers. And don't forget Magneto because he has to do a villainous turn. It's
this film because there is one
the family scene, but he shouldn't have a family. I'm sorry, I would like him to be happy, but he can't.
And in terms of the time as well, like with how old that kid is and the family, he would have had to have left that stadium at the end of Future Past and the next day he married and knocked someone out.
I'm telling you now, he left that stadium, needed a drink, went to a bar, and he slammed everything that moved. That was him immediately after.
What a gut punch, though, right? Jesus, way to let the drag shoot out of the X-Men franchise. Finally, we're back on track now. We reset the timeline. You can do anything. You tease with Apocalypse. After Magneto, the second biggest X-Men villain. Incredible villain. Think of all the things you could do, take it into new territory. And that it feels so amateurish. It feels like the mid-2000s superhero movies where they're still trying to find their feet and they don't know what they're doing. It feels like that. The action, the CGI. Oh my god, the CGI was awful in this movie. I remember the whole stuff in Egypt with the pyramids at the end. It just looked like trash.
It looked really bad. The effects at the end, it really did. And I was expecting more from Oscar Isaacs as a talented actor that he is.
What could he do though? He had so much makeup on. Could he even move? I think he was
miscast. I don't think it's never an imposing. Obviously, an Ex Machina is quite an intimidating guy, but not to the level of Apocalypse. You needed to go full Thanos with this thing.
He looked like a discount.
CGI would have been fine. Yeah.
If you guys have ever seen these GQ interviews where they talk about their career, they do it to Oscar Isaac, and it flashes X-Men Apocalypse. He laughs, and then they move on to the next film. So that's all you need to know. I think he probably took it off the back of the success of the previous films. Because he'd done Star Wars at this point. He'd done Episode 7. I think he must have filmed this before 7 came out. And he was on this streak of getting into mainstream. And you can see now why he's put off both doing franchises again, thanks to this and Star Wars. Different conversation. But everything went wrong with this film. Even Sophie Turner, I think Sophie Turner's one of the only good things about this film. And then that drops off. She was perfectly cast. I think the people they cast for the roles were fine. but the script was abysmal. Clearly, the direction on set was abysmal. Simon Kinberg was taking over when someone went AWOL, so Simon Kinberg was having to step in. Then, obviously, someone somehow gets a job doing the Queen film, and the repeat when more allegations come up. But this killed X-Men for me, and it's sad because they'd reset the world. And when they reset the timeline to move it forwards, this is what they do. And that's where the sad conversation is that, no, it should have just finished with Days of Future Past. There's a way to write this from Resistance. They could have, but instead they didn't. And instead they did Dark Phoenix, which also I'll say, before we even get to Dark Phoenix, there was no talk of Disney buying Fox when Apocalypse came out as well.
No.
That was a conversation that had never been said. No one was asking for the X-Men to go. It's not Fantastic Four where everyone wanted Fox to give a character back. X-Men was fine. And then this, I think, killed it for everyone. This film kind of, if X-Men was a hot air balloon, like Apocalypse was them shooting it, and Dark Phoenix is just it hitting the ground.
Mm-hmm. And you could kind of see the fire between all of the main actors' eyes just had gone, or it was on the way out with this movie. No, you know what's great? It was gone with this movie.
There is nothing redeemable from this film.
And like the big three, James McAvoy, Fassbender, they're just completely phoning it in. And one thing we didn't mention as well, Jennifer Lawrence cast as Mystique. They definitely, this was all her probably and her ego. She's got to have a massively inflated part. She's got to be like the head honcho of the X-Men essentially and everything like that, which I was never keen on. Mystique's not that character, but you can tell that she had something written into it. She didn't want to be in the makeup. She hated that. She wanted to just be her as she is, the face of that. But you could tell by this point she wanted out of this franchise.
I think this is a thing. So I was going to bring First Class. She's a supporting role. She's an up-and-coming actress, and she's fine in it. The part's written where you're a supporting character, but you're one of the leading supporting characters. That's fine. Days of Future Past is my issue with her because I've forgotten the name of the film where she won her Oscar.
Silver Linings,
Silver Linings came out.
Yeah.
Silver Linings came out. It's slap bang between First Class and Days of Future Past. It's like, okay, now we've got an Oscar-winning actress. Let's be honest. At the time, one of the biggest box office draws there is. The highest of the A-lister at the time and everything. Obviously, she was in a relationship with I've just forgotten his name, on that plays Beast as well, Nicholas Hoult. And I can see why they had that bigger role in Days of Future Past, and I can let that slide because she's important because she's a plot point of her turning evil. She still has too much in it, which I don't mind, but the plot point there was okay. She's going to go her villainous way. Then you get this film, and it's right. It's. Again, this is Fox. She's still a draw, and I think this is Fox. I wouldn't sit here and say she's dictated a contract. She definitely didn't want to do the makeup as much. I think what's his name? The reason is Alan Cumming that played Nightcrawler. He never came back to 3 or Days of Future Past because he said he won't do the makeup. He was in a makeup chair for like 10 hours a day to do a bit of filming, and I get that completely. But it reached a point with a Mystique where it just became too much, and went fast forward again to Dark Phoenix. You knew she was going to die because they'd kind of hinted at someone dying, and she's the one that was desperate to get out of the
trailer. They completely spoiled it in the trailer. And this film, we all thought, they're going to try the Dark Phoenix storyline again.
They teased it, didn't they, in Apocalypse? They're
going to bring back to write. They're going to give him another try. Of course they are. At doing
and two strikes and you're out, right?
Oh my God.
The issue is, this is what shocks me with Kinberg. His writing is not that bad. Like, he co-created Star Wars Rebels. He wrote many episodes in that. He had a producing credit, and he was going to produce a Star Wars film, which obviously was the Josh Trank one, and which he got ended because Fant forced it for obvious reasons. He told Disney, get rid of this guy. And then it's, okay, I'm going to direct Dark Phoenix. It's going to be his debut feature film, which is already a worry because I think he also covered the Fant Stick reshoots.
Mm-hmm.
And I get he's been this staple. You do get some writers that go on to directing. You don't get writers that go on to direct a $200 million blockbuster as their first feature film. And, Fox, at this point, the Disney discussions were taking place. They were somehow still doing Dark. I think they filmed the first draft of Dark. They filmed the first cut of Dark Phoenix. Then when the Disney discussions came in, obviously the first cut was done. It looked abysmal. They did reshoots, which was the train scenes, I think. Mm-hmm. And then they did even more reshoots. And and then it came out last year. And I think when we all sat down and watched it, it wasn't the worst X-Men film. It wasn't a bad experience. It was just sad. We're going in at this point. Disney's fully bought Fox. We know they're going to reboot the X-Men, which we'll get to in a bit. And it was this kind of not even a last hurrah. As I said, this is the crematorium. Like it's done. Just watch this and let the X-Men die.
It was just so forgettable. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
One thing: the Hans Zimmer score, for some reason, is far better than this film ever deserved or needed. I have it on my iTunes. I don't know why it was such a good score for such an abysmal film, but at least he gave them something for the first 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I remember that film. Was it really short as well? Like in modern day, I want to say it was like an hour and 40 maybe.
It was just under 2 hours, 114 minutes apparently. But yeah, it was just had no impact on me at all. It was a movie that I watched. I do think it is marginally better than Apocalypse. Very, very marginally.
I don't think so.
But it just feels like a TV show movie again, like Apocalypse, but even more so. It just feels. I don't even know what the budget for this thing was. Budget was 200 million. You cannot see that on screen. I don't care what you say. This feels so well. Yeah, it feels so small scale. Which I wouldn't have a problem with, but just from what we've seen, where the X-Men universe has gone, and we've seen what they can do, what we had 2 movies ago. It's such a shame. And again, you had great talent behind it. We finally take it into space, and we finally get a more comic book accurate origin story for the Phoenix. But we haven't. I think Sophie Turner was in like a handful of scenes in the previous movie. We don't feel like we know this new cast. It's not the same stakes. It's not the same investment as we had with Famke Janssen in the first few X-Men movies, where she was turning into Phoenix. And I think, there was a couple of cool kills, a couple of cool moves at the end in like the train sequence at the very end. That's literally all I can remember. It is the most forgettable movie. You look at the cast in this thing, the X-Men name, the studio that took it from like the lowest lows, but also gave us some of the best comic book movies. And at this point, we're just begging Disney. Well, they have it now, thank God. But at this point, we were just like, just take it back. It's done. It's dead. And that was just really sad. It was more sad than anything else.
Yeah, it's the lowest rated film on every site.
Ever. Just ever, of all time.
In the entire kind of, out of all the films, even more than Origins Wolverine.
It's not that bad.
You look what it made at the box office as well. So budget of 200, it made 252 mil. That's embarrassing for an X-Men film.
Did it come out a couple of weeks after Endgame? It was last year. I already forgot.
It was June. Last year.
I remember the cinema was. I went to the IMAX. There were 3 people in the screening, including myself. And I think I was messaging you guys. I was tempted to get my phone out for hours like this, and it just goes at 100 miles an hour. Like you expect the first act's done in 10 minutes, and it's sad. Like I said, you had the train scene. Michael Fassbender. I said there's no last hurrahs. At least he got to kill some people in a cool way. Everyone got to kill 1 or 2. Can't even remember what the villains were. Oh, it was
Jessica Chastain, nameless, faceless alien.
Weren't they meant to? I swear I heard rumors that they were meant to be the Krull. Yeah,
that was the rumor, and I think I think on the reshoots that was the thing they dropped because Disney, I think, are keeping that for MCU at a future phase, maybe. Which obviously
well, they have them, don't they, with Captain Marvel and stuff? So, and I think that came around. Well, it came out at the same time, didn't it? Roughly the same time. Also, the last thing we need to mention: this is set in 1992, 8 years before Fassbender changes into Ian McKellen. Why? It's just embarrassing. It's just.
We didn't even.
Should we move on?
Yeah, completely wrong on that one.
They murdered the X-Men, but anyway, that's the main X-Men saga. We've got 3 more to talk about.
I mean, the spin-offs were not too bad, I'll be honest. First, we got Deadpool 1, which, I'll be honest, is a thoroughly enjoyable film. I could see George shaking his head there.
No, I'm quite honest. I'll get to it when you want me to with Deadpool 1.
Yeah. I kind of enjoyed the humor that came with it. I think it was a breath of fresh air into the superhero genre. It took it in a completely different direction, which a lot of people quite liked. It gave Deadpool a film that, like, he himself would be proud of. It gave Ryan Reynolds another chance at doing that character and doing it right. And I mean, you can't name any other person other than him for Deadpool at this stage. I mean, I don't think you'd even have a chance of recasting him in the future. He is just going to be this immortal character. And he threw himself fully into it, and I thoroughly enjoyed both Deadpool films, actually, if we're covering both at the same time. Deadpool 2, maybe a little bit less than the first one, but maybe that's because I've only seen it once. I need to watch it again. But the first Deadpool film, at least, it holds up. It's an enjoyable film that you can kind of just throw on whenever you want.
It's a great love story. Came out Valentine's Day, didn't it? It was around like the Valentine's Day thing. It's quite unheard of, really, with Ryan Reynolds coming back like that from a character he made way back when in Origins, like a kind of nothing character. I don't want to say Ryan Reynolds was a no-name at that point, but he was doing a lot of rom-coms and stuff like that, and you could tell that he loves the character of Deadpool. You can tell that for what he got, he gave it his all, and it's really nice that they gave him another shot, and I think he was actually one of the few, like, championing this movie, and, like, a lot of the marketing was done through him, I think.
He leaked the footage, didn't he? Before it got greenlit, it was Ryan Reynolds that leaked the test footage, which got it greenlit, so fair play for that too.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably one of the most accurate comic book representations of a character we've had in any comic book movie, for better or worse. I know, George, you're not too fond of the character probably or the film, but I think for what it is, I think it's a very difficult character to do. I know it will probably get to this stage now, but it's a character that I don't think should be introduced into the MCU alongside all the other characters. The fourth wall breaking stuff and the poking fun at comic book movies works for Deadpool as a solo movie. I would probably take an X-Force movie or whatever they do with it.
Unless they want to do Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. When they finally want to say, okay, enough is enough, we're just going to get Deadpool to kill every MCU character and go through that.
But no, I think in terms of casting, the story, it's a very simple story. It was done on a very, very small budget, 58 mil, even less than the first X-Men movie. And I think for what they did, the effects don't hold up in all the shots, but again, it's done on a very small budget. I thought for the materials they had, they nailed it. We got Colossus as well, who actually has more to do from like the couple of little quick clips we've seen in X-Men 2 and X-Men 3. It's an enjoyable movie, but I will be honest, like I think that the first time you see it, like the crowd was roaring, like every single joke. Like I'll never forget the opening cinematic, the opening shot. Everyone was with it. Everyone was loving it. You could tell the hardcore fans who were like getting like the really obscure comic book references and X-Men franchise jokes and everything like that. I do think it loses its impact, but I think this is kind of like a lot of comedies. It does lose its impact on multiple viewings. I think I've seen the first Deadpool movie probably about 3 or 4 times, and nothing's come close to the first time watching it. Even with Deadpool 2, I think I've seen it twice, and I still like it. I still enjoy Deadpool 2, but I liked it significantly less than the first time that I watched it. But maybe that's just a comedy thing. I don't know.
I'm in the same book. I used to read the comics when I was younger. I thought it was really funny. I don't know if it's an age thing, but Ryan Reynolds on board leaked footage looked amazing. I was so behind this film. Opening day, full screening, incredible marketing campaign. I give him everything for that. First proper R-rated film, comic book film 2, was in modern era. And it was one of the most incredible cinema experiences I've ever had. It was so funny. I went to watch it again. And on the second viewing, nothing. To me, this is me personally. I know it's not an opinion. I know he's got hardcore fans now dropping dislikes and giving me death threats because they said they didn't like Deadpool because he's got that kind of fan base. It just didn't come back for me, and I was kind of gutted because it's a character I've followed for a while and I enjoyed it, and it killed it overnight for me. I don't know how. I've never had such a drop down off a film before. And then I was kind of, for the second one, I was intrigued to see what they were going to do. You had Cable, you had Josh Brolin, and I was intrigued. And then the second one came out, and I just thought it was awful. I thought it was, the jokes became... The thing of Deadpool is the jokes are on a fine line of balance. You can get the ones which are too easy to do, which aren't funny. And of course, it just had to be Thanos references in Deadpool 2. And I think it missed the point of what the comedy was trying to do. And instead it went for the really easy references that like 13-year-olds are going to find funny because they're sneaking into a cinema to watch a film rated 18. I think the second one big time dropped off. I will give it credit. The X-Force scene.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
Absolute comedy perfection. Brad Pitt's cameo where he got paid a cup of coffee for being on the film. That is genius. I loved that, and that's the problem is that, and I love Ryan Reynolds, but it gets to a point where I know him and Hugh Jackman have this social media war because they love each other and stuff, and it gets to a point where someone can be their character too much, and it kind of reminds me of like of the Americans only, like Bruce Forsyth hosting Strictly Come Dancing. It got to season 15, and that same awful joke isn't going to work. Obviously, it's very different hosting TV, but
yeah,
I like Ryan Reynolds and I like Deadpool, but I think it's also, and I've said this before in many of our videos, that awful Facebook crowd of people that take things and ruin it for everyone else. Mm-hmm. I think Deadpool had that, and I don't know if it's a criticism because it's not the film's fault, but when those same bandwagoners think that he's the only like fun character in history and how it's the funniest film ever, oh my god, did you get the reference? And I'm there like, shut up, like, come on. You're going to say Game of Thrones is incredible next week. Then after that, you're going to say XYZ's incredible. And Deadpool's a weird one. It's just I'll always go and watch them. I don't think you'll get a film at the cinema with Disney. I do think if they were smart, they'll put them on Disney Plus with like a one-off like
even like a series would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing. I think he's very well suited to streaming. I think fair play, the amount of money they made off those two films is insane. Yeah. And the best thing about Deadpool, no matter what anyone says, we don't get Logan without Deadpool 1. And Hugh Jackman said it. Everyone said it. Without Deadpool, there is no Logan. So I will happily accept it for that.
And I think that's a good segue onto. I mean, it's not safe to say here, but like it's very easy to say that this is one of our favorite films from the X-Men franchise. This is going to be in, I reckon, the top 2, maybe even 3 of at least all of us when we say our lists after we've done this film. This made it onto my favorite films of the decade list. This is on my all-time board of favorite films, which I need to update at the moment. But this is what I would consider to be a modern classic. A fantastic venture into the Western genre, a fantastic kind of adaptation of a comic book, even though it doesn't directly adapt it, the Old Man Logan comic. It does a brilliant job of at least portraying the character that is seen in that comic. This film is so well done, and I dearly love it so much. Just everything about it. It's the perfect send-off for Hugh Jackman as the character of Wolverine. I wish that this was the actual ending to the franchise. Honestly.
I mean, the ending shot, right? Like, Jesus.
The ending shot.
Could you get a more perfect ending shot for the X-Men franchise?
And I think what sold everyone on this film was probably the trailer. I mean, we even did a trailer edit of it, or Chris did.
The Last Jedi, yeah.
And James Mangold tweeted out as well, didn't he?
So...
James Mangold tweeted it. Wait, I was
Chris.
What? No,
I've just made his day like 3 years later.
Jesus, sorry about that.
But I mean, the film itself has loads of callbacks to previous X-Men films. I think that one of the biggest ones was the he will die holding his heart in his hands, and he dies holding his heart being his kind of non-genetic, but kind of his daughter to a sense in his hands. It's so beautiful. Like the film itself, I cried first time watching it. I'm happy to say that. I think, did we all cry? Are we all sticking our hands up?
I got a bit misty, but I mean, you don't go into Logan not being aware of how it's going to end. Right?
I'll be honest, it was when Professor X died.
It was. This is what ripped you. You knew Logan was going to die. There was no polite way to write him out. You had Stephen Merchant in it, which is just unbelievably excellent. And it was killing Professor X in his monologue in his sleep, and it was one of the biggest plot twists to me by bringing in who's the only person who can kill Wolverine himself. We had the excellent Richard D. Grant. This was perfect. This is James Mangold, who he's gone on to do Ford v Ferrari. He's now going on to Indiana Jones as well, which I don't want. A year ago I said I don't want anyone to touch Indiana Jones. The moment I said Mangold, okay, I'm down because he's too good. And this got nominated. I think before the big boom, sort of Black Panther and Joker's opened up, I think, the doors to more comic book nominations. But if I'm right, this was nominated for screenplay because they didn't have the balls to nominate it for best film. And it would have been nominated for best film if they had the balls. But screenplay was like, this is the best we can give you this year. And now finally they've accepted the rest. This would have been nominated for best film that year if they had the balls to do it. And it was remarkable. X-Men didn't deserve a film this good. I'm going to say very nice, but Hugh Jackman did. And the franchise to a point did. And like I said, Fox don't deserve the success that came with this, but they didn't. It was honestly a tremendous experience. And, you could even say it's not an X-Men film It's not Wolverine. It's a drama about this lone individual man and his daughter, and it's stunning. But there's so much to it. This is one of it. It's just a beautiful film. The way it's shot, the framing, everything. I can't give enough plaudits. And people keep saying, "Oh, we want Patrick Stewart back. We want Hugh Jackman back." Let them go about the way they did on the highest of highs. Mm-hmm. They both knew it. I know they both used to joke and say, if they want us in the MCU, we'll do it. That was always before Logan, not after.
I'm surprised that Patrick Stewart didn't get a supporting actor nomination in this film. I'm surprised that Hugh Jackman didn't get a best actor nomination in this film. It's such a high level of quality in this film for a superhero film. I want to point that out. Is this the greatest superhero film? Maybe one of my favorite superhero films of all time. It's up there. It's up there. Like
I don't know if I'd rank it.
This is in my top 5. This is in my top. I need to redo a whole ranking because I've done it for about a year. But this is 1,000,000% top 10. Should be top 5 for me. Could even be top 3, but I'd need to really go through. But this is above the genre, politely put.
Yeah,
like the Wolverine, this is a movie that I need to rewatch. I saw it once at the cinema, and I think I've seen it once afterwards. I don't think I like it as much as you two guys. Now, I'm not taking away from the film at all. It is a fantastic movie, and I think chief among them, the thing that I appreciate more about the movie itself is the tone of it. Because Jesus Christ, like before this, you had Days of Future Past where they, not that they all connect or anything like that, but if you are going to say like a loose connective tissue between all of them, you reset the timeline, everyone's in the X-Mansion, everyone's happy, you get to your next movie, Xavier's killed them all, and he's got like Alzheimer's, and you're like, shit. Like, wow, Jesus Christ. And it's just horrible to see. Like, it's fantastic performance from Patrick Stewart. Like, Jesus Christ, this is probably his best performance as Xavier, actually, out of all of them. It's just so depressing. And that's so great, though. It's great that it takes you to those places as well. It really feels like, Wolverine's got nothing left to give. Like, he is a broken man. He is as broken as any man's going to be in this thing. I think probably one of the weakest aspects, which is actually quite a good contrast with George, like you mentioned, that who's the one man that can beat Wolverine is Wolverine himself. That's actually my least favorite thing in the movie, is the villain aspect, and it's the whole clone of Wolverine and everything like that. It didn't really do anything for me, that side of it. But I think the walk away character in the movie, I don't know if she's done anything else, Daphne Keane. I think this was introducing Daphne Keane as the character of Laura.
In, His Dark Materials, the series on BBC. Which
of course she was. Yeah,
she was fantastic in that. She has a brilliant career ahead of her, whatever she goes on to do. But it shows that it wasn't just a one-off. She was great in one film as a child actor. She can do other acting roles and truly pull it off.
And like barely any dialogue, I want to say, in Logan. I don't even know if she might say like a few scatterings of words here and there, but she's very much this feral sort of child, essentially. And the emotion that she gives in this movie and the moments between her and Hugh Jackman, I would say this kind of falling into that trope of, the old weathered sort of like surrogate father kind of figure. You've seen it in The Last of Us. You've seen it in the new God of War game. You've seen it in this. It is kind of, that lone warrior with a child, and they're trying to like find some sense of humanity or some kind of purpose or some kind of like fatherly role. It is a story that's like as old as time, and it's been told told a whole bunch of times, but this is told very well. The Western style works very much for it, but as I said, I didn't come out loving it and going like, this is like top 3 X-Men movies. There are still some X-Men movies that I do prefer to this, but I think the themes in it and the tone of it is what it nails the most. But it is one, to be fair, I do need to watch again. It's been a long time since I've seen it. In fact, I don't think I've seen it since it came out in 2017. So it's been a good few years. It's definitely one that I probably need to rewatch. It's just not a very cheery watch, really, is it? Let's be honest. But that's not necessarily a problem. And I think probably the last 2 things on the item list, very, very quickly, because we've kind of got one sort of official, unofficial entry in the X-Men franchise, sort of. We haven't seen it yet. No one's seen it, because this has been like one of the most plagued movies I have ever seen in recent memory. The New Mutants. I remember when the trailer came out, I believe I did a trailer reaction to it, and it was framed, well, it's still framed as a horror movie in the superhero genre. Interesting premise. I don't know many superhero horror films out there. Could be interesting. But through reshoots, reacquisitions. I don't think I feel so bad for the director. What's that? Josh Boone. What's he directed? Has he directed anything else before?
I'd heard with this that Fox made him do reshoots. Then when Disney took over, they then let him reshoot his original story ideas, which I've never heard either. And it's going to be amazing because the cast are going to be aging throughout the film. It's going to be like Boyhood at this rate. And it's so contextual to like 2017 that you've got Thingy Bob of Stranger Things, you've got one of Game of Thrones, you've got what's the name from Split. I've forgotten all the actors' names, but it's kind of like 2017, which with the big up and coming. I mean, they're all still big up and coming. Don't get me wrong, but that kind of prime, like who needs their big franchise to put them in? It was like 111, and now it's like, oh yeah, look, they're all massive now, and they did this film like 3 years ago, which doesn't come out.
I just checked. Josh Boone is mostly known for his romantic drama films. Probably most famously, he did The Fault in Our Stars film adaptation from the book. I've looked at the running time, 94 minutes. It's very short. I think the reacquisitions kind of marred this one. I'll still go and see it, and I guess it was made at a time unofficially. Officially still of the X-Men franchise at that point under 20th Century Fox, but I know that Disney have got their mitts into it. They're probably repackaged and slapped a new sticker on it, a new sheen on it, everything like that.
Just saying that straight away.
I think
it should just be on Disney Plus.
They've said this from day one. It would be a big draw to a lot of people. It's not going to make any money at the cinemas. People won't watch it because it's been delayed for so long. If it's on a website where they have monthly subscriptions, it's fine. People will casually check it out. No one is going to go out their way to a cinema to watch this during a pandemic.
They probably would have got more views of it in this pandemic. I'd say wait until the whole...
They could have dropped it 3 months ago. But and today they dropped a teaser trailer for 45 seconds because it's, quote, Comic-Con at home weekend. And they still slapped that August 28th release date on it.
What's the bet that when they do this Comic-Con at home panel, they just say, oh, the film is online now. Do a Cloverfield Paradox and just release it straight online.
They put on the trailer they released today, August 28th. I mean, just release it on Disney Plus. It's not going to do them any harm. They've had to delay half the TV shows. It's something new. I know they're riding off Hamilton. They shall be for probably another year or two. But it's sad. I don't think. I think when that comes out, it's not going to be like Dark Phoenix's funeral. It's going to be like, you know how Emperor Palpatine's like, long have I waited, but no one cares. It's going to be more like that. Like, we waited 4 years for this. No one really waited 4 years. It just happened to come out of 4 years. But yeah, yay for New Mutants.
Are we ready to rank all of our X-Men films? Are we going to start at the bottom or at the top?
I don't know if I could rank them. I was just going to sort of go overall the legacy that the Fox X-Men films have had for me. I could do top three. I could do my top three.
I'm happy to chuck my top three in now very quickly.
Yeah,
I won't go into detail on each. I'm going to put 3 Days of Future Past, 2 First Class, 1 Logan. 1 and 2 could switch at any point on a given day.
My 3 would be number 3. I'd have First Class. At number 2, I'd have X-Men 2, and number 1, I'd have Days of Future Past.
I would have
Logan would be a 4 if I was going to throw it in there.
First Class at number 3, and Days of Future Past at number 2. Although those two could switch around, and Daylight to Logan.
Mm-hmm. So I guess just to round off then, impact of the X-Men franchise, obviously Disney has, apart from Spider-Man really, they technically do have Spider-Man at the moment, but they don't have the full rights to him. They've kind of over time acquired everything back, which is quite miraculous. Now, the Disney Marvel films are fine for what they are. However, they did get to a stage where they were very cookie cutter. I stand by what George said. I think that Endgame should have been the end of that and move into different territory after that. But they are very safe. They are very machine studio movies. That's not to say that, Fox wouldn't have had an impact with these movies, but I do think they did give the directors, for the most part, freedom to make the movies they wanted to make. If Disney had have had these, you wouldn't have had a Days of Future Past. You wouldn't have had an X-Men 2. You certainly wouldn't have had a Logan or a Deadpool. And, as bad as X-Men Origins is, as bad as Apocalypse, and sadly, Dark Phoenix, just the plummeting in quality of the X-Men franchise, I do think that it has its place in the history of comic book movies. I think the first X-Men movie was alongside probably its brother at those times, which was Spider-Man 1 in 2002. I think those two did set the threshold of all the years that have come after it, with all of the amazing movies we've had and all the bad ones that we've had too. I love the X-Men films. I'll always love the X-Men films, even the bad ones. I've always turned up for every single X-Men movie. I'm just kind of dazzle me. I don't care that they don't connect. I got over that a long time ago. I just love these characters. I just love seeing them. I am kind of ready for a change, though. I'm kind of worried what Disney will do with it, but I think that I'm ready to see the X-Men characters now. I've had all those movies. There's loads of movies that we've just listed there. We've been talking for almost 2 hours on them. I think it's good to let it go to a new home and let's see them interact with these other characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It'll be different, and I don't think we'll get any of these standalone movies that you can look at here. I don't think you'll ever get anything of that quality, but they'll be fine. They'll be entertaining superhero movies, which is what Disney does. But I don't think you'll have Oscar contender of like Logan or something like that. It's not going to happen.
I'm in the same with you here. I had a lot of fun with these over the years. Like I said, I was a bit late to X-Men 3, but I got to see the others out that came after. I had some real highs and some real lows. And, you enjoy these films for the characters more so than the story. Obviously, the story's good. It comes with it. But, you're in it because you want to watch Wolverine, Professor X, Magneto. And Disney's an interesting one because, like I said, people were holding off. No one wanted Disney to touch them. And that's what Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix did. And I'm happy we've had the films we have had come out, even the bad ones, because now I think Disney's in a situation where I don't think the X-Men can work in the MCU in that Earth planet, that universe. The whole, where the hell did the mutants just pop up from? It doesn't work yet. And to be fair, I'll give Kevin Fraser backing. The one thing MCU have is patience, and that's why they have a cinematic gargantuan printing money license, because they've got time. I think they've planned X-Men. I think Fantastic Four's coming in first. Different conversation. To me, X-Men should be their own phase. They should not be in phase 4. Yeah, we're on phase 4 now. Yeah. Bring them in phase 5. Do something. There's a way to do it, but I think the one thing I reckon Disney will do with it is do the things that Fox wouldn't do. I think there'll be less in terms of diversity and class in the sense of the themes because it's set in the MCU. I'm sure they'll have tidbits of it. But I think what they will do is the sort of the comic book things which Marvel can go with, the yellow costumes, the silly costumes, this and that. I'm intrigued to see what they do, but I'm nervous. But I think X-Men's ready for a consistent new take on it. I think that's a better way, but the more time that passes, the better. It's going to be Wolverine. Do they go for the original X-Men stories where Wolverine came in later? Do they hold him off, putting him in a film as long as possible? Because everyone knows you can't replace him at all. There are candidates to be Magneto and Professor X. I would love to see Jason Isaacs as Magneto. I've said this before. Oh, yeah. Be a very good middle-aged one at now, but Wolverine's going to be their issue. But you also, I don't think you can make a modern-day X-Men film without Wolverine.
No, you couldn't.
I'm intrigued, but I've had my memories with it. I'm intrigued to see what comes.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, just very, very quickly, I'm willing to look past the bad films to have the good films in this franchise because the highs are incredibly high, even though the lows are incredibly low. As far as the future of the franchise is concerned, it will come into Marvel. I think they're going to try and integrate it in with maybe like a whole... maybe as a post-snap thing, you never know.
I've heard rumours that Rogue's going to be in Captain Marvel 2 as a villain somehow. I've heard that. I don't know if that's clickbait.
Rogue gets her ability to fly in the comics off Captain Marvel.
Okay.
Captain Marvel's powers. So it would be interesting to see it that way. It could be interesting to see them brought in as villains to start off with.
I would like that.
And seeing them as that kind of thing, and then you get maybe a film dedicated to them which actually shows that, no, they're not villains. They are, like, they just got their own struggles and they've got that kind of vibe between them.
I think if you're going to do it, I think it's going to be like a Spider-Man thing, sadly, where you don't really get the origin of that Spider-Man character. They just are. They are just there pre-set up. You don't have to like set anything up or anything like that. But obviously they need to set it up into the universe. But it'll be very interesting. I think it's going to be a long game. It's going to be like easily over a decade before they do, well, when we get all these X-Men things, however they go about doing it. But I guess that will round us off, and I guess I'll just finish off with like a little thing that's written here on Wikipedia. With 12 films released, the X-Men film series is the 8th highest grossing film series, having grossed over $6 billion worldwide. That's definitely an impact for a film franchise to have. So that'll do it for I guess it's kind of an unofficial retrospective, really, of all the X-Men films to date. I'm sure when we get that amazing New Mutants film, we will be here with a review. Very much intrigued to see what that's like. But before we sign off, please... Oh, we did answer... yes, we did answer Carl Roberts' question. Thank you for that comment, Carl. Hopefully we answered that effectively for you there. And before we sign off, this has been appearing throughout the stream, but be sure to comment. Let us know your favorite X-Men moments, favorite X-Men movie, least favorite X-Men movie, anything regarding that. Please share, subscribe, bell icon, like, all of that good stuff. And also be sure to follow us on our various social medias. They are listed in the description down below. But in case you don't want to read that, they are going to be appearing on screen now. So if you Facebook Cinema Savvy, Twitter at cinema_savvy, and also for cinema_savvy for Instagram as well. We also have t-shirts now, so you can pick up your very nice Cinema Savvy t-shirt. I'm sure the link to that is in the description down below. Ours are on the way, and we will probably be rocking those in a future video at some point and looking very fashionable and stylish in the process. So I'm not sure what we have coming up next on the channel. I think we have a quiz next week, don't we? On Thursday. I know it's going to be a Disney quiz. So we're going to be getting the questions together for that. But we have lots more content planned, especially as we get into the back end of the month and into August. Very, very good month coming up in August. Follow us all on there. We've talked you to death. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video, guys. See ya.